Before time, there were only two, but their son craved power. His weapon, a sickle, his crime, changed the universe forever. He became king. He created paradise on earth, but power born of blood breeds only fear, and a terrible curse fell upon the new ruler. To protect his throne, he found a terrifying way, a way that turned him into a monster devouring his own future. But destiny cannot be cheated. One child survived, and his revenge will be the greatest war in cosmic history. Stay with us until the very end to see how the tyrant who gifted the world the Golden Age was cast into the abyss for his unspeakable atrocities. In the very beginning, when the concept of time itself was but a slumbering idea in the cosmic cradle, and the universe was a silent, dark symphony of unborn stars, there were only two: Uranus, the boundless and cold sky, whose bottomless mantle was woven from impenetrable darkness and distant, unformed light, and Gaia, the warm, breathing, and generous earth, whose invisible veins pulsed with life force awaiting its moment. They were everything and nothing, the alpha and omega of creation, the primordial pair from whose eternal and inevitable union all existence was to be born. Their embrace, stretching from one edge of being to another, gave birth to the first dawns and the first sunsets. Their silent whisper became the first wind that caressed the still bare, virgin rocks of the forming world. From this grand, all-encompassing cosmic union came forth the 12 Titans, beings of colossal power and unimaginable majesty, destined to become the first rulers and governors of this young, untamed universe. The last of them, like a belated but most significant and fateful thought of creation, was Cronus. From the earliest moments of his existence, he displayed a nature strikingly and disturbingly different from his brothers and sisters, while his mighty brother Oceanus, whose essence was fluid, changeable, and boundless, ruled over the vast waters that encircled the world, and the radiant Hyperion, proud and shining like the midday sun, commanded the dazzling light of the sun. Cronus watched them with a quiet but all-consuming cold envy. He saw their power not as an inherent gift, but as something that could be measured, assessed, compared, and ultimately surpassed and appropriated. Cronus, whose discerning gaze penetrated the very essence of things, presided over intellect and the invisible celestial axis around which the newborn world revolved. Creus, silent and stern, commanded the cold, indifferent fire of distant constellations, arranging them in the eternal, unshakable order on his father's dark canvas. And Iapetus, whose mighty hands were forged for both creation and destruction, forged the destinies of future humanity, which had not yet even come into being. Their sisters, the Titanides, the noble and just Themis, the living embodiment of divine law and order, the beautiful Rhea, whose soul was filled with inexhaustible fertility and maternal tenderness, the radiant Thea, mother of all celestial bodies, the pensive and deep Mnemosyne, keeper of all the world's memory, every spoken word, and every deed performed, the mysterious and prophetic Phoebe, mistress of moonlight and enigmatic oracles, and the mighty Tethys, ancestress of all the rivers and streams that would water the earth, governed various aspects of nascent existence. Each of them was content with their role in the great and, as it seemed to them, unshakable order established by their almighty Father. But not Cronus. In his soul, like a dark, poisonous seed, ambition ripened, destined one day to bear bloody fruit and forever overshadow them all. where his brothers and sisters saw in Uranus an almighty, albeit stern, father-creator, Cronus saw only a despot whose rule was not eternal, but merely a temporary obstacle on his own path to absolute power. In his gaze, a cold, calculating spark already burned, distinguishing him from the others. It was not merely a blind thirst for power, but a deep, unshakable, and cold conviction that he deserved it more than anyone else. He was a silent observer who saw the cracks in the monolith of his father's authority, patiently waiting for his moment. After the birth of the majestic Titans, Gaia, whose fertility was as inexhaustible as life itself, gave birth to other, even more wondrous and, at the same time, terrifying creatures. First, from her depths, like condensations of the most primordial, untamed energy, emerged the three Cyclopes: Brontes, whose voice was like thunder; Steropes, whose gaze was as bright as lightning; and Arges, whose light was like radiance. These were one-eyed giants, and their single eye, located in the center of their mighty foreheads, blazed with the unquenchable heat of the celestial forge. Their hands were made not for gentle embraces, but for forging divine weapons filled with the fury of the storm and the blinding power of light. Following them, shaking the very fabric of the world to its foundations, came the three Hecatonchires, known as Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. These creatures were the living, breathing embodiment of primordial chaos and irresistible, wild force. Each of them had 100 mighty hands that moved in a continuous, chaotic, yet formidable dance, capable of simultaneously grabbing, crushing, and hurling entire mountains, and 50 heads that spoke, whispered, and roared in unison, shaking the foundations of creation. Their power surpassed all imagination and seemed a direct threat to the very order that Uranus cherished so much. But Uranus, gazing from the height of his flawless starry throne upon these terrifying offspring, felt not paternal pride for their incredible power, but a deep, soul-chilling fear that permeated him to his very core. He, the absolute ruler of the harmonious cosmos, saw in them not his children, but the living embodiment of chaos, a potential threat to his undivided dominion, a force he could neither understand nor measure, nor, most importantly, control. His refined aesthetic sense, accustomed to the perfect harmony of the celestial spheres, was deeply offended by their monstrous, grotesque asymmetry. As soon as the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires were born, Uranus, without allowing them even their first breath or to see the light of their father, seized them with his celestial hands and, with disgusted revulsion, threw them back into their mother's womb, into the darkest, suffocating, and impenetrable depths of the earth. He sealed them there, condemning them to eternal imprisonment in crushing, silent darkness. Gaia suffered unbearably. The granite bones of the world groaned under the weight of her endless grief. Her monstrous, yet still beloved children, trapped within her very depths, thrashed and struggled in fury and despair, causing her infinite, tearing physical and mental pain. Scorching lava, like her fiery, bloody tears, seeped through the newly formed cracks in the earth's crust. The dark, dull sounds of their rage, their moans and curses echoed from beneath the earth, serving as eternal reminders of her husband's unthinkable cruelty. The highest mountains, still learning to reach for the sky, trembled from her torment. The deepest valleys cracked, and waves of earthquakes shaking the very foundations of creation rolled across the world. The suffering of the primordial earth knew no bounds, and with each passing day, her resentment towards Uranus grew, transforming from quiet maternal sorrow into cold, tempered, and unyielding hatred. Finally, Gaia could no longer bear this agony. Gathering her Titan children in a deep, secret cave, where the very walls seemed to absorb sound, and where Uranus's all-seeing ears could not penetrate, she addressed them. Her voice, usually like the gentle rustle of leaves and the soothing murmur of streams, now resonated like ancient stones on the verge of cracking from internal tension. She spoke of her infinite pain, of the crying injustice of imprisoning her younger children, who had committed no offense other than being born too powerful and different. She appealed to their honor, to their filial love, asking that someone find the courage to confront their father and put an end to this endless, senseless cruelty. The Titans listened to their mother's words with growing anxiety and palpable fear. Oceanus, whose voice was like the deep and slow ocean tide, muttered something about the impossibility and sheer madness of such a challenge to Uranus's absolute, undeniable power. Hyperion, whose pride was as bright as his light, openly expressed his concerns about the terrible consequences that such a rebellion would inevitably entail, fearing the loss of his high status and radiance. Iapetus, always pragmatic and cautious, shook his head decisively, considering the entire endeavor doomed to failure from the outset. The other brothers remained in deathly silence, their mighty figures seeming to shrink and diminish from the fear of the grandeur and danger of what Gaia proposed. A heavy, oppressive silence filled the cave, laced with their unspoken fears. And in this ringing silence, only Cronus, the youngest, took a decisive, fateful step forward. Against the backdrop of palpable fear and paralyzing indecision of his elder brothers, Cronus stepped out of the shadows. His figure seemed slenderer than theirs, but an unyielding firmness of tempered steel emanated from him. His voice held not a trace of doubt or youthful ardor, only a cold, blade-like resolve that cut through the oppressive silence of the cave. He calmly and firmly declared that he would undertake the task of ending his father's tyranny, but he immediately set a condition. Gaia must provide him with a weapon worthy of this great and dangerous goal. His brothers recoiled from such unheard of, almost blasphemous audacity. Terror mixed with involuntary, shameful admiration flashed in their eyes. But Cronus stood firm as a rock, his gaze fixed on his mother's eyes, and in that gaze she saw not a surge of desperation, but a mature, cold, and ruthless calculation. Gaia recognized in her youngest son the courage mixed with ruthlessness that she so desperately needed. She descended into the most secret, most hidden depths of the earth, into its primordial, beating heart, where matter was pure, concentrated, and untouched by time. There, in a flame that burned even before the creation of the first stars, she forged with her own hands a terrifying, unseen weapon, a sickle of adamantine. This mythical metal was harder than the strongest diamond, its blade sharper than any thought, and it was capable of cleaving not only flesh, but the very essence of being, separating cause from effect. As Gaia placed this weapon into Cronus's hands, the cold, dark metal of the sickle suddenly flared with its own sinister and hungry light, as if recognizing its new master and anticipating the bloody harvest to come. In Cronus's hands, it did not feel heavy, but rather like a natural, harmonious extension of his own will. Gaia's instructions were precise, brief, and merciless. That very night, when Uranus, unsuspecting, drawn by eternal habit, descended from the heavens to join her in their eternal ritual of creation, Cronus was to hide in a designated place and patiently await the opportune moment. A single blow would suffice, but it must be absolutely precise, lightning fast, and utterly merciless. No hesitation, no pity, no unnecessary words. Cronus nodded silently, his face an impenetrable mask hiding a storm of anticipation and cold triumph. He disappeared among the primordial shadows that condensed around him, as if recognizing him as one of their own, becoming part of the darkness itself. He froze in anticipation of the moment that would forever and irrevocably change the balance of the universe. Creation held its breath. The stars ceased to twinkle, the wind died down, and time itself seemed to slow its pace, as if the entire cosmos, from the smallest dust particle to the grandest nebula, sensed that something terrible and irreversible was approaching. Cronus felt no fear, only an icy calm and an intoxicating, sharp anticipation of triumph. He waited until the night reached its deepest, darkest point, when his Almighty Father would be most vulnerable. When Uranus, shining with myriad cold and indifferent stars, descended from the celestial heights to embrace Gaia in his accustomed, eternal embrace, Cronus, soundlessly, like death itself, emerged from his hiding place. He uttered no word, cast no threat or warning. His movement was singular, fluid, and terrifying in its efficiency. The adamantine sickle, flashing in the pre-dawn twilight, described a perfect, deadly arc. The blow, delivered with inhuman strength and the cold precision of a surgeon, severed Uranus from the source of his creative power and boundless authority. It was so clean and final that the very fabric of fate seemed to split in two with a dry, deafening crack. Uranus's cry, filled with inexpressible pain, infinite astonishment, and cosmic fury, swept across the entire cosmos with a force never before heard. His groans shattered the newborn stars into fragments, made the invisible pillars supporting the celestial vault tremble, and created a cosmic echo that still resonates in the most furious and violent storms. The divine blood of the mutilated sky, dark and burning, fell upon Gaia in immense, heavy drops, and each drop, charged with primordial, creative, and simultaneously destructive power, immediately gave birth to new, wondrous, and terrifying beings. From the earth, soaked with this divine blood, arose the vengeful Erinyes, hideous goddesses with snakes for hair and fire-spewing eyes, destined to eternally pursue those who commit crimes against their family. Behind them, tearing the earth, rose the mighty giants, whose strength was comparable to that of the Titans themselves, and who would later challenge the Olympian gods in a new, even more terrible war for power over the world. And finally, from the same blood were born the Melian nymphs, kind and sorrowful spirits who would dwell in sacred ash trees, preserving the eternal memory of this first terrible act of bloodshed in the history of creation. The severed parts of Uranus did not fall to the earth. By the force of the monstrous blow, they were cast far into the churning, frothing sea. Where they touched the salty waters, the sea began to foam violently, surge and bubble, creating dazzling white and radiant foam. From this sea foam, like the most perfect and beautiful pearl, was born Aphrodite, the goddess of love, insatiable desire, and unearthly beauty. She emerged from the waves fully adult and perfect, sailing on a giant seashell like her first chariot. and her very appearance softened the horror of the moment, bringing into the world a new, hitherto unknown, intoxicating, and dangerous force, Uranus, bleeding and mutilated, retreating forever to the farthest, unreachable heights of the cosmos, where he would become a mere indifferent observer, cast his last and most terrible weapon at Cronus, a curse that would echo through all the coming ages. With a weakened but prophetically strong voice that reached Cronus despite the distance, he proclaimed, "As you have betrayed me, your father, so shall your own offspring betray you. One of your future children will be the cause of your downfall and your eternal, indelible shame." Cronus laughed with contempt, cleaning the divine blood from his gleaming, satisfied sickle. "The curses of the defeated are like the wind," he said, addressing himself more than his retreating father. "They make a lot of noise, but they cannot move even a small mountain." However, despite his blatant and arrogant contempt, Uranus's words were seared into his mind like a searing brand. It was a poisonous seed planted in the most fertile soil of his ambition, destined one day to sprout with lush, thorny, and suffocating flowers of all-consuming paranoia. With Uranus overthrown and banished to the celestial heights, Cronus, by right of the strongest, became the undisputed new ruler of the universe. His brothers, witnessing his cold resolve and terrifying power, submissively and with suppressed fear, acknowledged his primacy. His first act as ruler, dictated both by the necessity to fulfill his promise to his mother and the desire to immediately demonstrate his new power, was to free the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires from the dark womb of Gaia. First, the three Cyclopes emerged into the light, staggering from eons spent in darkness and blinking from the unfamiliar light. Their single eye gazed with curiosity and gratitude upon their liberator. Their gratitude was immense, and they immediately offered to forge divine weapons, an unbreakable armor for the new ruler to strengthen his throne and protect him from any enemies. Then, with a rumble that shook the earth, the three Hecatonchires appeared, their 100 mighty hands moving in a chaotic yet formidable dance, and their 150 eyes fixed on Cronus with dog-like devotion. Their 50 heads roared in unison, an oath of eternal loyalty. Their power was colossal, visible, almost tangible, and absolutely uncontrollable. But Cronus, observing this terrifying, untamed force and vividly remembering Uranus's prophetic, ominous words, suddenly experienced the same feeling as his father, a cold, sticky anxiety, quickly escalating into chilling fear. These creatures were too powerful, too independent, too ugly. Their blind loyalty today could just as easily turn into blind betrayal tomorrow. Unexpectedly, without any warning or explanation, he gave the order to imprison them again, but this time in the darkest and deepest abyss beneath the earth, in Tartarus, from which he believed there was no return. When Gaia, whose heart contracted with horror and bitter disappointment, asked him in confusion why he was again imprisoning those whose liberation had been the main motive and justification for his rebellion, Cronus replied coldly and distantly, without looking her in the eyes, "True power is never shared. It is either taken whole or lost forever. I will not repeat the mistakes of my short-sighted father." Gaia remained silent in response, but in her ancient eyes, as old as the world itself, a spark of deep, unquenchable disappointment flashed. She realized that her son, the liberator, had himself become a tyrant at that very moment, and that the bloody cycle of violence had not been broken, but merely entered a new, perhaps even more terrible, phase. Firmly established in power, Cronus set his shining throne of black obsidian and gold atop Mount Othrys and began to organize the cosmos according to his will. He generously distributed domains among his Titan brothers, bestowing gifts upon those who did not dispute his primacy, thereby buying their loyalty. Oceanus received full control over all the waters surrounding the earth. Hyperion became the lord of the sun and all celestial light. Themis was placed at the head of divine justice and laws, which now served him. And Mnemosyne became the keeper of all memory and knowledge that should not contradict his reign. Under the wise and firm rule of Cronus, what subsequent generations would call with longing and reverence the Golden Age began, a period of absolute, unimaginable perfection that would never be repeated. Cronus created the first human race, the Golden People. These beings lived in a state of eternal, unshakable bliss, knowing neither sorrow nor worry. This first humanity knew neither illness nor feeble, ugly old age. Their bodies remained young, strong, and beautiful for centuries. War was an unknown, absurd, and ridiculous concept, for there were no reasons for enmity in a world of abundance. Hunger never tormented them, because the earth, generous and loving its new ruler, provided everything without the slightest effort. Fields themselves yielded rich harvests of golden wheat. Trees dripped with thick, fragrant honey sweeter than any nectar, and rivers flowed with nourishing and cool milk. The very concept of work or hard, exhausting labor did not exist, because nature in abundance provided everything necessary for a long and joyful life. Death, when it finally came after centuries full of peace, joy, and contemplation, came not as a terrible, frightening tragedy, but as a peaceful and sweet sleep without pain or fear. For long centuries, Cronus ruled with genuine wisdom and paternal care. The mortals of the Golden Race revered him not out of fear, but out of sincere, deep love and boundless gratitude. Crimes did not exist, because there was no need that could push one to commit them. Conflicts were impossible when everything was in abundance for everyone. In those golden, serene days, Cronus, the mighty ruler of a prosperous world, deeply and passionately fell in love with his sister Rhea, the Titaness of fertility, motherhood, and cosmic harmony. Rhea possessed a beauty that changed with the seasons. In spring, she was as fresh as the first blooming flower. In summer, lush and generous as a ripe fruit. In autumn, wise and sad as a fading golden leaf. And in winter, calm and majestic as the earth sleeping under snow. Her long hair rippled like fields of ripe wheat in a light breeze, and her kind eyes were green, like the most fertile meadows after a warm summer rain. Her laughter, like the ringing of silver bells, made flowers bloom wherever it sounded. And when she wept from joy, her tears became blessed rains that nourished the earth. The wedding of Cronus and Rhea was celebrated on Olympus itself with unprecedented splendor and magnificence. All the Titans and Titanides were present, sincerely rejoicing in the union of absolute power and creative fertility. Oceanus emerged from the sea depths, bringing as a gift the largest and most perfect pearls from the seabed. Hyperion made the sun shine with a special, warm, and tender intensity. The Muses sang melodies so beautiful and harmonious that their echo, it is said, still resonates in the deepest and most sacred mountain gorges. It was a perfect union that promised eternal prosperity to the world. For a significant period, their mutual love completely filled Cronus's heart, and managed to drive away the dark, intrusive shadows that visited his mind from time to time. In Rhea's embrace, the king of the Titans found true peace that soothed his nocturnal fears and deep-seated doubts. Rhea had a unique gift for calming his anxieties with her mere presence and restoring his wavering confidence. But when Rhea, radiant with unearthly happiness, announced that she was expecting their first child, everything radically and irrevocably changed. Uranus's prophetic curse, which had lain dormant, coiled in the darkest and most hidden corners of his soul, suddenly awakened with terrifying, relentless, and destructive force. Cronus's nights turned into endless, nightmarish scenarios, where, with frightening, clear, and agonizing clarity, he saw his unborn son holding in his hand the very adamantine sickle that he himself had once used against his father. The horror that Uranus had once felt at the sight of his powerful and rebellious children now, like a contagious, incurable disease, settled in Cronus's own soul. His father's curse ceased to be mere distant, malevolent words. It turned into an obsessive, poisonous whisper in his mind, poisoning every moment of his triumph and desecrating his very love for Rhea. On the day Hestia, the first daughter of Cronus and Rhea, was born, the king of the Titans did not rejoice. He paced nervously and feverishly near his wife's chambers, his heavy steps echoing ominously in the radiant halls of his palace. When the midwives reverently and with trepidation brought the newborn to him, he took her in his arms. The infant was absolutely perfect. She had her mother's bright green eyes, full of unearthly tranquility, and even in her tiny, serene face, there was already a gentleness and warmth that would later make her the goddess of the hearth, the eternal keeper of the inviolable family flame. But contemplating his daughter's innocent face, Cronus felt no tenderness or paternal pride. He whispered to himself, his words as cold as the cosmic void devoid of light or warmth, "I will not make my father's foolish mistake." Uranus allowed his children to grow until they became a real, tangible threat. "I will be wiser. I will pluck this weed before it takes root. Not one of my children," he decided in that terrible, fateful moment, "will live long enough to become a living instrument of my downfall." Without further hesitation, as if performing an inevitable and sacred ritual, Cronus opened his divine mouth to an incredible, monstrous size and swallowed the tiny, defenseless Hestia whole. The girl, without even a single sound, disappeared into the impenetrable depths of his divine stomach, where she was destined to remain alive, but imprisoned in absolute, eternal, and silent darkness. Rhea screamed. It was not just a scream, but the tearing of her very soul, a sound of such unbearable cosmic pain that it seemed to make the most ancient mountains weep and the heavens themselves crack. It was the primordial, all-encompassing cry of a mother for her irrevocably lost child. "What have you done?" she sobbed, digging her nails into her palms until they bled in despair. "She is your daughter, your own blood, our first long-awaited child." "She is my foreseen doom," Cronus replied, his voice as cold and hard as the ice of distant Tartarus. There was not a drop of regret in his eyes, only the dark, mad flame of all-consuming paranoia. "I prefer today's pain to tomorrow's inevitable betrayal." This horrific tragedy became a nightmarish, predictable routine. When Demeter, the future goddess of fertility and golden grains, was born, Cronus, without the slightest hesitation, with mechanical precision, repeated this terrible act. The infant, still carrying the sweet scent of birth and maternal warmth, disappeared just as quickly into his insatiable jaws. Then Hera, destined to become the queen of the gods, majestic and proud, met the same terrible fate. After her came Hades, the future dark and just ruler of the underworld, and Poseidon, destined to rule all seas and oceans. All these divine children, full of untapped power and potential, remained alive within their father's womb, slowly stretching in absolute, crushing darkness, day by day, year after year, feeding the growing, white-hot anger against the one who had condemned them to this terrible, unimaginable existence. With each swallowed child, Rhea withered. She became ever more silent, ever more distant, as if her soul gradually detached from her body, seeking refuge from the unbearable, monstrous reality. Her laughter, which once made flowers bloom and gladdened hearts, faded forever, leaving only silence behind. Her gaze became glassy, empty, and hopeless, like the autumn sky. She no longer sang songs that brought joy to all living creatures. She became merely a pale, silent shadow of the radiant, joyful goddess she once was. Rhea pleaded, wept until her tears formed entire rivers of pain that flowed across the land. She cursed the day she agreed to become Cronus's wife and mother of his children. But he became completely deaf to everything except the constant, poisonous whisper of his paranoia, which sounded louder in his ears than any scream. Each swallowed child offered only a brief, deceptive moment of relief to his fear, but then only increased his unbearable guilt, and each new drop of guilt fed his fears, creating a hellish, vicious cycle of violence and horror from which there seemed to be no escape. "When will this madness end?" Rhea asked desperately, her voice a barely audible whisper full of hopelessness. "Only when," Cronus always replied, looking through her with his mad, obsessed eyes. "There is no potential heir left who could betray me in the future." When Rhea became pregnant for the 6th time, her inexpressible pain and boundless grief, accumulated over many years, melted in the crucible of despair into a cold, unyielding iron resolve. This time, she would not allow Cronus to destroy this innocent creature as well. She would cry and plead no more. She would act. She was prepared to do anything to save at least one of her children. On one particularly dark and moonless night, when even the stars seemed to turn away in horror from what was happening in the palace of the Titans, Rhea secretly, like a thief, crept into the domain of her mother, the ancient and wise Gaia. The earth, which had watched the monstrous actions of her son Cronus with growing horror and powerless rage, immediately understood her daughter-in-law's unspoken suffering. She advised her to flee immediately to the distant island of Crete, where on Mount Ida there was a sacred cave, hidden from all eyes, protected by forces so ancient and powerful that even the all-seeing Cronus could not detect what was happening within it. "The local nymphs, my faithful servants, will help you with the birth," Gaia said, her voice full of compassion and determination. "And I myself will take care to hide the child from the eyes of his mad father." Rhea undertook the most dangerous journey of her life, fleeing in the deep silence of the darkest night she could find. The path was extremely painful and difficult, as labor had already begun, but her iron resolve and maternal love forced her to move forward, ignoring the pain. She arrived at the sacred cave on Mount Ida, just as the pangs of childbirth became unbearable. There, in the deepest depths of the earth, among the millennia-old stalactites that dripped like petrified, eternal tears of Gaia herself. A child was born who was destined to forever change the fate of the universe. The newborn uttered not a cry, but a mighty roar that sounded like the roar of a young lion taking its first breath of life, and his eyes immediately blazed with a power and fury of lightning, which he would eventually wield as his main weapon. His name would be Zeus, and in him would be concentrated all the pent-up fury and thirst for justice of his devoured brothers and sisters. Following a perfectly coordinated plan devised by the two mothers, Gaia took a large, oblong stone from the earth, precisely matching the newborn infant in weight and size, and carefully wrapped it in warm swaddling clothes, soaked with the same sacred herbs and oils that accompanied all previous births, to deceive Cronus's sense of smell. Meanwhile, the local nymphs silently and carefully carried the real Zeus to the most secret, hidden depths of the cave. Rhea, with the stone in her arms, returned to Cronus's palace. Despite her wild nervousness and fear, she managed to maintain the same serene, submissive, and grief-stricken expression that she had honed to perfection during the previous 5 tragedies. "Here," she said, her voice not faltering, "is your new son." Cronus, completely blinded by the routine of his paranoia and utterly incapable of suspecting that his broken wife had the courage and cunning to deceive him, took the heavy bundle without even bothering to examine it. With the same mechanical gesture, perfected to the point of automatism, which he had repeated 5 previous times, he swallowed what he believed to be his 6th child. The heavy stone disappeared with a dull thud into his divine stomach, where it settled next to his living but imprisoned children. But Cronus, dulled by his fear, noticed absolutely no difference. He felt only fleeting, deceptive relief once again. While Cronus congratulated himself on having once again successfully eliminated his last potential threat, the young Zeus grew in complete secrecy in the sacred and impregnable mountains of Crete, surrounded by loyal guardians sworn to protect him at all costs. The divine goat Amalthea, a sacred animal endowed with special powers, suckled him with her milk, which granted him superhuman strength and divine endurance. Bees from all over the region constantly brought him the purest golden honey, which not only nourished him physically, but also increased his natural wisdom and cunning day by day. The Curettes, sacred warriors of Crete, who, according to legend, descended from the first humans created by the gods, protected the divine child with absolute, fanatical devotion. Every time the little Zeus cried or made any loud noise that could reveal his presence, these warriors would immediately begin to strike their polished bronze shields and sharp spears furiously, creating a deafening rhythmic roar that could be heard throughout the island and merged with the sound of the wind and waves. From his distant palace on Mount Othrys, Cronus sometimes heard these strange noises coming from Crete, but his paranoia was so focused on direct family threats that he interpreted these sounds as ordinary religious rituals or military exercises of the Cretan mortals. It never occurred to him that they might be protecting the very living instrument of his future downfall. The nymphs Ida and Adrastea personally took responsibility for the daily upbringing and education of the future king of the gods. They taught him all the secrets of nature, the true hidden names of all living creatures, magical songs that had the power to make plants bloom out of season, and secret rituals that controlled the changing of the seasons. Over the years, Zeus developed extraordinary, mind-boggling abilities. He not only grew in physical strength, but his wisdom expanded at an astonishing rate. He learned to instinctively control the basic elements. He could summon rain with a gesture, create powerful winds with his breath, make the earth tremble beneath his feet. All the animals in the region instinctively recognized him as their natural king and lord. He could speak with proud eagles that brought him news from all over the world, command wolves as if they were domestic dogs, and the fiercest lions obediently licked his hands. But Zeus's most notable and important trait was his supernatural, innate ability to perceive truth in all situations. He could see through any lie and perceive the true intentions of any creature that approached him. The same flame of unyielding resolve that once burned in Cronus's eyes when he wielded the sickle against Uranus grew day by day in his gaze. But alongside this resolve, there shone in his eyes what his father had completely and irrevocably lost: genuine compassion for the suffering of others and an innate, unwavering sense of justice. When Zeus finally came of age, after many years of secret growth and training, he transformed into a youth whose beauty was dazzling and whose physical strength surpassed that of any being that had existed before him. His stature was taller than any mortal. His voice naturally possessed the resonant power of distant thunder, and when he walked, the very earth seemed to joyfully respond to his presence. Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, daughter of the mighty Titan Oceanus, had secretly watched Zeus's growth from his earliest years. She became his closest and most loyal advisor, and it was she who prepared a special, potent potion that would become the key to liberating his imprisoned brothers and sisters. It was a complex mixture of the rarest herbs and magical substances that possessed the specific power to completely and irreversibly reverse the divine digestive process. The moment of revenge that had long brewed in the hearts of the gods had finally arrived. Zeus returned to his father's palace, adopting the perfect guise of a young and humble cupbearer seeking service. His appearance was so perfect, and his manners so refined and courteous, that no god at court suspected his true identity. He appeared before Cronus during a grand feast, adopting a posture of complete but absolutely convincing humility. "My lord," Zeus said in a honeyed, flattering voice, "I am a new servant who wishes to honor you above all other gods in the cosmos. As a token of my eternal and boundless devotion, please accept this humble offering." He offered him an exquisitely crafted golden goblet, filled to the brim with divine nectar, secretly mixed with Metis' potent potion. The drink was prepared with special, devilish care to have an intoxicating aroma and an absolutely delightful taste that completely concealed any trace of its true and terrible purpose. Cronus, pleased by the youth's reverence and beauty, and thirsty after the long feast, drank the contents of the goblet in one long, greedy gulp without any suspicion, savoring every drop of the seemingly pure and harmless nectar. For several long, tense moments, nothing happened. Cronus continued to chat with the other Titans, laughing and drinking as always. But then the potion began to act with ruthless, relentless speed. The stomach of the king of the Titans began to contract violently, and his entire mighty body rebelled against him with a force he had never experienced before. First, to everyone's amazement, he vomited out the stone that he had considered Zeus for so many years. The heavy rock rolled across the marble floor of the palace with a crash, and the sound echoed like the first thunderclap the universe had ever heard. Then, before the astonished eyes of all present, his children began to appear. One by one, they emerged from their father's womb, as if being born anew. First, the mighty Poseidon, then the grim Hades, after them the regal Hera, the beautiful Demeter, and finally the gentle Hestia. They had fully grown during their long imprisonment in the digestive darkness and emerged as adult and powerful gods, fully armed and ready for the battle that they knew was inevitably coming. Poseidon furiously brandished the trident he had forged with his own divine power during his long years of captivity. Hades wore a helmet of invisibility that made him invisible at will. Hera radiated such royal majesty that it intimidated all present. Demeter held sheaves of golden wheat, which promised either abundance or famine depending on her will, and Hestia burned with the sacred, unquenchable fire of the eternal hearth. "Father," Zeus said, shedding the guise of the cupbearer and revealing his true divine form, which radiated pure power in visible, tangible waves. "I am Zeus, your son, whom you thought you had swallowed so many years ago. Your reign of terror and fear has ended. It is time for you to pay for your crimes against family and justice." Cronus slowly straightened up, wiping his lips stained with divine vomit. Despite the shock of the revelation and the pain of losing all his children at once, his gaze regained that primal, indomitable ferocity that had once led him to overthrow Uranus. "So, the prophecy is coming true after all," he muttered with a bitter, crooked smile. "My son, you have learned well the lesson of betrayal that I have taught this world. But I have been the ruler of this universe since the stars first learned to shine. I will not fall as easily as my father. The difference between you and me, Father," Zeus replied, his eyes burning with the bright fire of long-delayed justice, "is that I will rule not by fear, but by right. You devoured your own children, imprisoned the innocent. You turned the very concept of fatherhood into tyranny. And what are you going to do about it?" Cronus laughed with contempt that could not hide his growing nervousness. "I brought humanity the golden age. Under my rule, mortals knew perfect, serene happiness. I have come to bring justice," Zeus replied, and for the first time, lightning flashed and crackled in his hand like a living creature, like the promise of a coming, all-cleansing storm. Thus began the Titanomachy, the great war that split the cosmos in two and would last for 10 full, bloody years. For a decade, the universe became one giant battlefield, where two irreconcilable concepts of power clashed in mortal combat: tyranny based on fear, represented by Cronus, and power based on justice, embodied by Zeus. Cronus quickly gathered his Titan brothers, who remained loyal to him out of fear or habit. Oceanus devastated the seas to create giant tsunamis that reached the highest clouds. Hyperion darkened the sun and turned light itself into a cutting, blinding weapon that burned enemies. Cronus unleashed all the winds of the cosmos to create hurricanes of such force that they uprooted entire mountains. Iapetus forged terrible weapons from the fire of the Earth's center, creating swords that burned with eternal, unquenchable flames. The Titanides also joined the battle on the side of their ruler. Themis perverted the very concept of justice to serve the established power, creating laws favorable to Cronus. Mnemosyne erased strategic memories to create complete confusion and chaos in the enemy ranks. and Phoebe blinded opposing warriors with false, deceptive visions, causing them to mistakenly attack their own allies. Zeus commanded his newfound brothers and sisters with a strategy that combined brute, irresistible force with subtle, intellectual tactics. Poseidon raised new seas from the depths to counter Oceanus's tsunamis, creating grand aquatic battles that boiled and evaporated entire oceans. Hades opened deep, bottomless chasms in the earth to swallow entire legions of enemies, turning the battlefield into a deadly, constantly shifting labyrinth of abysses. Hera coordinated military strategies with regal wisdom and composure that rivaled the best generals. Demeter grew giant, predatory plants that served as living fortresses capable of moving and attacking independently. Hestia maintained an unquenchable sacred fire that gave supernatural strength and endurance to all the Olympian fighters, ensuring they never completely ran out. For 10 full, endless years, the cosmos bled in a war that surpassed any previous conflict in its scale and destruction. Mountains melted under the supernatural heat of battle and turned into rivers of fire. Oceans boiled like giant cauldrons, and stars fell from the sky like the burning tears of grieving gods. Neither side could achieve a final, decisive victory, and it seemed that this monstrous war could continue forever, gradually and systematically, destroying all creation to its very foundations. The war seemed destined to last forever until Gaia, tired of the endless destruction that tore her body like thousands of burning knives, turned to Zeus with advice that would ultimately change the course of the conflict. "My grandson," she said in a voice that held all the wisdom and all the sorrow of the ages, "if you truly seek justice, as you proclaim, then prove it not with words, but with deeds. Free those whom your father unjustly imprisoned out of pure fear." Zeus immediately understood the profound wisdom of these words. His struggle was not only for personal power, but for the restoration of cosmic order disrupted by tyranny and paranoia. He descended into Tartarus, into the darkest and most hopeless abyss, accompanied by Poseidon and Hades. There, in the impenetrable, oppressive darkness, they found 6 prisoners, 3 Cyclopes and 3 Hecatonchires, weakened by eons of imprisonment, but unbroken in spirit or will. "My brothers," Zeus said to them, personally breaking their adamantine chains with his own hands, "you have suffered injustice for too long. I offer you complete and unconditional freedom and the opportunity for revenge against the one who imprisoned you without any reason. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges shed tears of gratitude that shone in the darkness of Tartarus like the purest diamonds. In gratitude for their liberation, they immediately set to work in their underground, fiery forge. They forged for Zeus a lightning bolt that would become his legendary, irresistible weapon, a projectile of pure light and concentrated fury capable of piercing any defense and destroying any target. For Poseidon, they created a magical trident that could split entire continents and cause earthquakes with a single blow. For Hades, they forged a helmet of invisibility that made him completely invisible to any being, whether mortal or god. The Hecatonchires, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges swore eternal loyalty to Zeus with voices that resonated like mountain avalanches. With their hundreds of hands, each of them could hurl 200 mountain-sized rocks per second, turning any battlefield into a deadly and unstoppable rain of stones. With these powerful new allies, the war radically and irrevocably changed its course. The final battle took place on the plains of Phlegra, where the fate of the entire universe was to be decided once and for all in an ultimate grand confrontation. Cronus and Zeus met in the very center of the battlefield. Father against son, past against future, established order against revolutionary justice. The very air was rent by the supernatural power of their clashes. Zeus's lightning bolts cut through the air like fiery serpents of white fire, while Cronus unleashed all his primal, titanic fury accumulated over millennia of undivided rule. "You should never have been born," roared Cronus, creating a storm of pure energy that made the very pillars of heaven tremble. "And you should never have become a tyrant," Zeus replied, hurling a lightning bolt that illuminated the entire cosmos like a second blinding sun. "Your reign of terror and fear ends here and now." The personal duel continued for 3 days and 3 nights without a single moment of respite. Cronus fought with the desperate fury of one who had already lost everything and knew there was no possible return. Zeus fought with the iron, unshakable determination of one seeking justice for all past victims and a better future for all living beings. Finally, as the fourth dawn began to weakly break on the battle-ravaged and scorched horizon, Zeus gathered all his divine power into one last devastating lightning bolt, the most powerful he had ever created. The bolt, like a spear of light, pierced all of Cronus's defenses and finally knocked him to his feet. The great king of the Titans, the ruler of the Golden Age, collapsed like a falling mountain. And with his fall, the entire universe shuddered from its foundations to its farthest limits. His defeat marked the end of the Titan era and the beginning of Olympian rule, which would forever transform the nature of the cosmos and the destiny of the world. With the end of the war, after a decade of continuous destruction, Zeus convened a great tribunal to determine the fate of all the defeated Titans. Not all of them had supported Cronus until the very end. The mighty Oceanus remained neutral throughout most of the conflict, unwilling to interfere in the family dispute. The wise Themis switched sides at a crucial moment, recognizing the righteousness of Zeus's cause. And the far-sighted Prometheus, son of Iapetus, actively fought on Zeus's side from the very beginning, foreseeing his victory. These were forgiven and retained their honorable positions in the new Olympian cosmic order. But Cronus and those Titans who followed him to the bitter end were condemned to eternal imprisonment in Tartarus, that terrible prison located beyond the world of the departed, surrounded by impenetrable bronze walls and eternally guarded by the grateful and loyal Hecatoncheires. "Father," Zeus said, as the adamantine chains closed around Cronus's mighty limbs for the last time, "your punishment is not personal revenge, but necessary justice. You yourself demonstrated that absolute unchecked power corrupts even the wisest." Cronus, defeated but retaining his royal dignity to the very end, replied, looking his son directly in the eyes, "My son, you have won this battle, but the power you now possess will tempt you just as it tempted me. Beware of repeating my mistakes." "That is precisely why," Zeus replied, his voice firm. "I will never rule alone. I will share power with my brothers and sisters and create laws that even I myself can never break." Thus ended the reign of Cronus, the Titan who ruled during the legendary Golden Age. Chained eternally in Tartarus for his own crimes, he paid a terrible price for devouring his children out of an all-consuming fear of losing power. Uranus's curse was fulfilled to the last letter. As he had betrayed his father, so he was betrayed by his offspring. The people of the Golden Age, created during his reign, were the most perfect and happy race ever to exist. When they departed from life after centuries of complete and serene existence, they became benevolent spirits who invisibly protected future, less perfect generations. Subsequent races of humans never managed to achieve that lost perfection. In the fields, farmers for millennia continued to invoke Cronus's name during the harvest, remembering the god who had once brought unprecedented abundance to the world. His sickle, which had once mutilated the sky, became a peaceful symbol of the harvest that nourishes mortals. Thus, the story of the last of the Titans remained through the ages. The king who created paradise on earth and destroyed it with his own hands, becoming a victim of the very fear that led him to power, his legacy remained forever dual. He was both a monster and the creator of an ideal world, an eternal reminder that even in the brightest light, the darkest shadow can lurk.